With Andreas, we're starting our coffee tour in Colombia. Самое главное найти хорошую корзинку для сбора кофе. Thank you, thank you. Вот такой вот кофе.
This one is for you. This another one is for you. And these are coffee cherries. Why? Because in the most of the cases we will have red ones. But in some cases, if you see, we can have yellow ones. And when we open this, we will have two seeds.
Когда раздаю.
One and another one.
Получилось два зернышка.
Yeah,
two seeds.
Yeah, two seeds. And in normal cases, in more than 90% of the cases, we will have two seeds. But if you see, in some cases, for example here, we will have only one. If you see, one of them doesn't grow. For this reason, with this seed we can have more nutrients and we can produce with this seed a more intense coffee. But this genetic mutation
Instant from which? From small one?
Yeah. If you notice, this another one doesn't exist. Only one has grown. For this reason, with this we can produce this more intense coffee. But this genetic mutation represents only 5% of the cases. In more than 90% of the cases, we will have two seeds inside. And if you notice, this seed is covered by a slimy thing. This slimy thing is the natural sugar of a coffee. It's called mucilage. And if you want to try, you can feel the sweetness. Don't bite it, only put the seed in your tongue. And if you notice, it's really sweet.
Yeah?
But don't bite it.
Не раскусывай только его. Облизать.
With this slimy thing, later in the coffee production, we can produce another kind of coffee with chocolate or caramel notes. And this coffee, it's called honey coffee.
This one.
Yeah, but in the most of the cases, we will wash the coffee in order to remove this slimy thing. But when we don't wash the coffee, we can keep this and we can produce later this coffee with chocolate or caramel notes. Yeah? You can plant your coffee seeds.
Ну, расти кофейное зернышко.
Yeah, only one, no, but one seed for one hole. And later cover up.
And how long it's gonna take to grow to the production?
A lot of time. But when we plant the seed, we need to wait 2 months to have this, a matchstick, fósforo in Spanish. And if you notice, we have here the seed. Inside this seed, we have 2 leaves. For example, here. See here. This seed opens after 12 days.
It's leaves.
Yeah, and we will have 2 leaves.
So young.
Let me show
Эта маленькая штучка вырастает, и потом она становится, там листики из нее вырастают уже. You say in 12 days?
Excuse me?
In 12 days they grow.
Yeah. And 2 months, 12 days after, we will have 2 leaves. And later, probably 1 week later, we can have this. And this is called chapola. Why? Because we have here a butterfly, and this butterfly is called chapola. And if you notice, this is very similar
to
a butterfly. Babushka.
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 No, babushka.
Babushka.
Forget about it. Butterfly.
Yeah, butterfly. Mariposa in Spanish. Yeah, when we have this, we can remove it from here and we can plant it here on this bag with soil. Because if you notice, this is not soil. This is sand from the river.
Sand on the river.
Yeah. Why? Because here the particles are more separated, and at this way the roots can grow easier without problems, without obstacles.
Понимаешь, корни легче растут в песке.
Yeah, because if we use the soil from the first time, probably we can have a lot of problems, a lot of obstacles to produce coffee. We need to use this at first, but later when we have the chapola, we can plant it here, and later we need to wait 6 months to have this, according to tree.
Через 6
months
месяцев.
after we have this. But remember, before we need to wait for 2 months to have this. For this reason, 8.5 months to have this. But when we have this,
12 дней вот это, потом 2 месяца вот эти листики, и через 2 месяца их пересаживают вот в такой кувшин, и через 6 месяцев после пересадки вырастает вот такое дерево.
Yeah. And later, when we have the colino, we can plant it on the field, and 18 months later, we will have a coffee plant. And we know that we have a coffee plant when we see the first flower. Follow me? Flower. Here or here. This flower lives only 3 days. And after the flower dies. But in the space when this flower grows, we will have something like this. And a small green bean. And this small green bean needs almost 9 months more to grow to become a cherry like this. Yellow one or red one.
9 months.
Yeah, more. Remember, 8.5 months to have the colino, 18 months more to have the coffee plant, more than 2 years. But later, 9 months, almost 3 years for produce the first cherry from the moment we plant the seed. It's a long process, but later we have luck because we are in Colombia. We don't have seasons because we are in the equator line. And at this way, we don't need to wait for a moment when we have all the flowers. We produce flowers constantly through the year. And at this way we can have in the same tree cherries and green beans. We pick the cherries and the next week we can return and we can have more cherries, and at this way we can produce coffee all the months in the year.
Okay.
We have look, we can produce
It's
coffee
continue
constantly.
non-stop.
Yeah. But we have months when the production is higher. These months are May to June and September to November. Why? Because 9 months before we can have more flowers for the weather conditions and we can produce, and later, 9 months later, we can have more cherries and we can have the most important months for the production. May to June and September to November. May to June is called cosecha, harvest. And the second time it's called traviesa. It also has a meaning in another language, but it's like to say crazy girl. I don't know why, but this is the name that we use for that. Cosecha and traviesa. And these periods will be different in each area here in Colombia. Why? Because the weather conditions are very different in each area. For this reason, when we have low production, probably in another area, they will have high production. And we don't have problems as a nation in terms of production. Yeah? Have you understood me?
Absolutely.
Yeah? We have here a green part. This is not dark
То есть
red.
ягода должна полностью быть своего цвета, она не должна содержать зеленую. То есть она должна быть или полностью красная, или полностью желтая. Но зеленого в ней быть не должно. Тогда ее собирают.
Bad cherries, like this, like this, like this.
Да, из-за этого, что они разные, они собирают это вручную. И в то же время они имеют зеленое. Почему? Потому что у них сезон не кончается никогда, и поэтому все время цветет и все время собирается. А в других странах, где цветет по сезонам, там и собирается по сезону, и тогда сборка механическая. Здесь сборка в Колумбии только ручная.
Robusta.
This is Arabica, number 1. This is a
Number 3.
Number 3.
Liverica.
Ливерика. Оно растет на уровне как бы моря, а здесь 1850 метров над уровнем моря, поэтому здесь в основном арабика. And the second one is
Robusta.
Robusta.
And Robusta represents almost 26% of the whole production. But here we don't use Robusta and we don't use this. All the coffee that we produce in Colombia is produced with this species. Why? Because the concentration of coffee inside one cherry of Arabica, is lesser than another species. And when we have low concentration of caffeine, we can produce smooth coffee. Why we produce the smoothest coffee in the world here? Because all the coffee that we produce is produced with this plant. And because this plant grows better here than in other places in the world. To produce this coffee, we need an altitude between 800 and 2,200 meters. And we are here at 1,850 meters over the sea level. And we have 3 different systems of mountains. We are in the Andes. But this plant needs tropical conditions. We are in the equator line. It's very difficult to find a place in the world with this altitude and weather conditions. And for this reason, this plant grows better here than another place in the world. And we can produce the smoothest coffee. But for example, with Robusta, you can drink the strongest coffee. Because this tree has the highest concentration of coffee.
Robusta is for the morning. This one for the evening.
Yeah.
What is the red one? What is that?
This one is another tree. It's called achiote. It's for the food. For example, some people use that to add to their foods to create color. And some indigenous people use that to paint their body. With this, the indigenous can paint the body. It's very common in the indigenous people. But we have almost 50 different species of coffee in the world. The rest of the species represent only 3% of the whole production. They are very unknown, and if you want to drink coffee from this and other species, you need to go to local communities in Africa. All the coffee is from Africa. The coffee that we have here, for example, is from Ethiopia.
What this one?
This one is called Caturra. And Caturra is one variety of Arabica. We have different species, but inside each species we have different varieties. And this variety was very common here before the 80s. All of our coffee before the 80s was produced with this plant. But in the 80s came to our country a fungus. And this fungus has destroyed this plant. This plant is very fragile, but the people don't knew this before the 80s. When this fungus came, we have an economical fungus almost has destroyed our production in the 80s. This plant cannot resist the fungus. For this reason, in the 80s, we knew that we need to change this plant for another one. And in the 80s was created here this another variety of Arabica. This variety of Arabica, it's called Castillo. Castillo or Colombia 1. Castillo is the second name of a scientist that crossed different varieties in order to have this plant. With this plant we can have good production, we can have sherry with good quality, we can resist the fungus, and we can have the perfect height for the coffee picker. Because if you notice, we can have more, and we are not so tall here, and in some cases we need to use stairs.
Is the same like that?
No, it's another variety.
It's another one.
This variety is called Red Tabby, and Red Tabby produces less than Castillo. We need almost 3 trees of this variety for produce the same that we can produce with 1 tree of Castillo. But
this
with
Castillo.
these cherries, we can produce red fruity notes in a coffee cup. If we have different varieties, we can produce different flavors, coffee with different notes. Here, for example, we have 6 different varieties of Arabica: Caturra, Red Tabby, Castillo, Yellow Tabby, Pink Bourbon, and Geisha. Each variety will give us different flavors, different notes. But remember, all the coffee that we will have will be smooth coffee, because they are varieties from the same species, Arabica. And with Arabica we can produce the smoothest coffee. Yeah?
When it's on the sale in the store, it's just the Arabica, or it's mentioned exactly what kind of the Arabica?
Yeah, here we use only Arabica. And if you have first class coffee, you know from which variety you have the coffee. But in another countries, probably they sell only Arabica, but they don't put the names.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and in some countries they can use, you can use, for example, different species. It's very common to have blends between Arabica and Robusta. Coffee.
It's in the Calabica. In the Calabica, you're doing a mix with the roast or not?
Yeah, when we roast the coffee, we can make this mix. But here we use only Arabica, but we can have mix from different varieties of Arabica. For example, the coffee that you will drink at the end of a tour is a blend between Castillo and Red Tabby. 50% and 50%, and we roast together, and we can produce this coffee. Yeah.
But it's called Arabica in export.
Yeah. And let me show you this another tree. This tree is called Caturra 2, like this another one. And if you notice, we have a strange thing with this tree. What's the strange thing with this tree? If you compare with the rest of the trees that we have. If you notice, we don't have branches here. We have branches only on top.
Okay. But it's the same like this one.
Yeah. But if you compare these 2 trees with the rest of the trees that we have, the rest of the trees that we have branches here. But we have branches with this tree only on top.
Like umbrella.
Like umbrella, yeah. Why? Because this tree is in its last cycle of production. And how I know this? With this, and this tree doesn't have enough branches here, because this tree was cut 2 times. If you notice, this tree has 2 trunks. This tree was cut 2 times. Why? If we don't cut the tree cannot produce more. But when we cut it, the tree will grow in another sense, and we can have another cycle of production. If we don't cut the tree cannot produce more. When we cut the tree, we can have another cycle of production. We need to wait 3 years for produce the first cherry, and after begins the first cycle of production of 5 years. When this first cycle comes to the end, we cut the tree. Later, the tree will grow in another sense for 2 years more, and later we will have a second cycle of production of 5 years. When this second cycle comes to the end, we cut the tree again. The tree will grow in another sense for 2 years more, and later we will have a last cycle of production of 4 years. 5, 5 and 4, 14 years, but if you count the whole process of growing, you will have 21 years. This tree is 21 years old, and when the tree is 21 years old, we cut the tree, we remove the roots, and we free space for another plant. If you wanna cry, if you wanna make a minute of silence, it's the moment, because this plant will die soon.
Нам дали поручение найти 5 спелых ягод. Вот я в окружении кофейных плантаций пытаюсь найти. Пока нашел 4. Наверное, фиговый из меня кофейный плантатор. Под ногами у меня вот так вот. В общем, заросли. Вон там Лена копается. Hello! Да, у меня 4 ягоды.
Have you found?
О, зато я нашел, I got bananas. Forget about coffee, I got bananas. Чтобы сделать 1 килограмм кофе, нужно собрать вот в эту корзинку 10 килограмм кофе.
Yes, I see the green one.
But they are green. No, we need that they are yellow.
What is it?
It's níspero. It's very delicious. It's like...
Вот бананы я знаю.
yeah, if you see on top, we have
Yes, I see.
yellow ones.
It's very difficult to pick up.
Survive with plantain.
Это плантейн. Смотри, у него сплошная вода внутри. Вот она.
Игорь, ну не строй.
Okay.
But there's no problem. With this, we don't destroy the tree. Variety. For this reason,
Здесь
remember,
желтые у нас, там
there's no
красные. Да, вон там еще растут. О, what is that? The lot of yellow
lime
fruits.
lemon.
Lemon.
Oh, lemon. This is the same
Lime
lemon.
lemon.
Lime lemon. Okay.
Have you seen this tree before?
Yes, it's a
Yeah,
Jaruma.
I like it.
Jaruma, yeah.
It's very common here. Jaruma.
It's only in the mountains.
Yeah. And with this tree, we can have a lot of different trees because the shade allows that another trees grow.
Like umbrella.
Yeah, like an umbrella.
О, смотри, как цветет.
Ой, красивая, да, прелесть.
It's collect water?
Yeah.
How you call them?
Wow.
Heliconia.
Heliconia.
Heliconia or bird of paradise. Ave del paraíso.
О, bird of paradise. Ля. Интересно. Ничего, тебя снимаю.
Я думаю, ты все рассказываешь про это.
And if you notice, it's very similar to the flower of platanillo. It's
Ага,
from
вот
the
это
same-
где я
it's
снимал.
from the same family.
Вот это где Лена стоит с платановым таким же красивым.
Oranges.
О, it's oranges.
Yeah. And the flower of the orange, it's called azahar. The coffee and the orange, the coffee flower, excuse me, and the orange flower share the name. It's the same name for the different flowers. This flower is called azahar, and the coffee flower is called azahar too. They are very similar. A pipit plant, a plant that grows over another plant.
Ну, его срубили, а выросли новые.
Yeah, we cut the tree and later this plant grows in a natural way.
Маракасы.
And another kind of bird of paradise.
О, другого цвета немножко. Ох, какие, смотри, как красиво.
I don't know the name in English, but in Spanish it's lengua de suegra. Suegra in Spanish is the mother of your wife, for example. What's the word in English? I have forget.
From the one tree, half kilo for the 1 year.
Yeah.
Roasted coffee.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, for
It means you pick up 5 kilo berry, in a year from the one tree.
We pick 5 kilos of cherries to obtain at least 500 grams of roasted coffee in 1 year for 1 tree.
Gotcha.
And for this reason we need to have a lot of coffee trees, and we have here 5,000 coffee trees per hectare, and we have here 19 hectares, almost 95,000 coffee trees in our farm.
Это plantain flowers. Такой интересный цвет. Да. Да.
Эх ты!
Igor and Iliana. This machine is a shell remover, and this machine was created in the 19th century in Nicaragua by Otto Niklaus Kuhl von der Fech, a German man. And he creates this machine to separate the seeds from the shells. How? This metal press makes pressure against the cherries, the seeds fall down here for the gravity, and with this mechanism we will transport the shells over there. If you wanna try, go ahead.
Лена, крути.
Slowly or...
There's no, it doesn't matter.
Зернышки посыпались кофе.
Stop. I don't like the coffee with fingers. Go ahead. Yeah. It works very well.
Very smart machine.
Very smart and very easy, and the machines that we use right now work with the same mechanism. The only difference is an engine that we connect here, and the engine do the same that we did with our hands before. It's the same machine, but they are bigger. And if you notice, we have here the head of the machine, and we have here 2 heads. And in each of these heads we can keep 1.5 ton of cherries. At least we will have only 300 kilos from these 3 tons, because remember we lost the 90% of our weight. And under we have the rest of the machine. Give me one moment, and later I will show you the rest of the process.
Штуки сверху, вот с них падает вот сюда, в 2 машины.
We have the heads of the machine, the cherries fall down here, the seeds fall down here, and later with this screw we will transport the seeds here. And we add water here. Below we will connect a pipe like this, and through this pipe we will transport the seeds to this area. And with this another screw we will transport the shells behind the wall, and we reunite this way, and later we will transport the shells to our compost area to create compost for the same plantation. And here we will select the coffee for the second time. The first filter that we have is the coffee picker. The coffee picker selects only red ones and yellow ones. But later we need to remove problems, because we can have worms, we can have imperfections. And how can we remove that? Here we fill this area with water, and later we will have 2 different groups. One group of seeds that sinks and another group of seeds that flows. The group of seeds that flows is a group of seeds with the problems, with imperfections, with the worms. For this reason we need to remove it, and later we will have only the good ones. But what we do with the bad ones? A little part is for the compost, but the rest we sell these bad seeds to another companies that produce cheaper coffee. The cheaper coffee is produced with imperfections, with worms, with problems. But here we produce only first-class coffee.
Who knows about it? What do you buy?
The cheaper coffee is produced with garbage. Excuse me, but it's the reality. And what happened with the rest? With the good ones, we will transport these over there, and we will use water to remove the mucilage, the slimy thing, the natural sugar.
Like sugar.
Yeah, but in some cases we will not wash.
What is not more removed here?
Excuse me?
Why is it's not removed here?
The mucilage.
Yeah.
We remove a part, but only a part, because it's really it's very difficult to remove. Only with water we need to use pressure, and we use pressure over there to remove that. Yeah.
Pressure by what? By horse?
But with our hands. A brush that helps us to remove that. But here we remove only a little part of the mucilage. But later we need to remove it. We will wash the coffee in order to remove that. But in some cases we want to keep it. For this reason, in some cases we will remove the coffee from here, the good ones, and later we will dry the coffee with the natural sugar. If we dry the coffee at this way, we can produce later chocolate or caramel notes, and this coffee is called honey coffee. When we don't wash the coffee is called honey, but when we wash it, the coffee is called pergamino. Two different processes in order to create two different flavors. The flavor depends on the plants, on the biological conditions, on the variety, but depends on the process too. We can have, for example, the same variety. We can have, for example, geisha, but we can wash the geisha, or we cannot wash the geisha, and we can produce two different coffees with the same variety. Yeah, and give me 1 second. The first method that we have is this one. It's called silo. It's an oven. We put the coffee inside, close the door, and later for 2 days we will dry the coffee with a temperature of 30 or 40 Celsius degrees.
What's the temperature?
30 or 40 Celsius degrees. And how we create the heat inside? With this, we put inside a kind of fuel, we burn this kind of fuel, and later, at this way, we create the heat for the silo. What kind of fuel do you think we use for this machine?
I don't know.
We need to use the same coffee, because if we use coal, if we use oil, for example, or wood, these materials can alterate the flavor and the smell of a coffee. We use a part of a coffee, and this part is called cisco. It's a second skin that protects the seed, and the second skin is under the mucilage, under the slimy thing. But we can remove it only when the coffee is dry. Before, it's very difficult to remove it. For this reason, we need to dry coffee in order to obtain the fuel to dry coffee again.
Okay, when you dry it, you remove the skin,
Yeah.
and
after,
put the skin to the burn.
and later we can dry coffee again. It's a circle. How we obtain the fuel from the first time? When we turn on this machine at the first time.
No, say again.
Yeah, how we obtain this fuel when we turn on this, this machine at the first time. If we need to dry
Yeah, I'm understand, but I don't know the idea. Okay.
This is not the only method that we have. We have the sunlight, and we can obtain this fuel from the sunlight. We use this method only when the production is high. May to June and September to November we produce a lot, and we need to be quick. But when the production is low, we don't need to be quick, because we produce not so much coffee. Yeah?
Yeah, I got you.
For this reason, we use this only for a moment, but we use the rest of the year the sunlight. Follow me? Have a higher number. We can have more.
Зерна должны быть 10-13% влаги содержать, когда готовый кофе. Ну, здесь делать сушится на солнце. No, it's clear.
Electricity with gas and with the software. When we turn on the machine, we can see on the screen of the computer something like that. One line with the temperature and another line with the time. We decrease the temperature till the turning point, and later we will increase the temperature again, and in the minute 8 we can hear a crack, like popcorn. The coffee activates the properties, and later we have 4 minutes when the coffee will activate the rest of the properties. And at this moment, the coffee falls down over there, the coffee moves for a moment, and later we can remove the coffee on cans like this, and we can transport these cans behind, and with our hands we will select the last imperfections in order to put on packages only the perfect coffee. And we need to decrease and increase the temperature because all the external conditions like the humidity, like the pressure, like the same temperature can alter that. And because all the varieties that we have need special values, special variations. And it's the same with the processes. It's very different to roast fermented coffee than if we roast, for example, natural or honey coffee. Each process needs different variations. And this, before we roast, and now before we roast the coffee in this machine, we need to know some things. These are our processes. Pergamino is when we wash the coffee. Honey is when we don't wash the coffee. If you notice, we can have here two different honey coffees. This one, it's called black honey. And this another one, it's called, this another one, it's called red honey. If you notice, this is darker than this one because we don't use water for this. probably we can have here 85% of a mucilage, but with this we use a few water. For this reason, this has more mucilage than this one. Probably here we can have 60% of mucilage. And we need to do that in order to create two different notes: dark chocolate and caramel. Natural is another process. For this process, we need to dry the coffee completely, with the shell, with everything. We take the fruit from the tree, and later we dry the coffee completely with the shell. And at this way we can produce more fruity notes and we can have more acidity. And how we know that the seeds that are inside are good ones? We put these cherries before on water, and later we have two groups, one that sinks and another that flows. The same process that we have for the seeds, we use for the cherries, and we can select the coffee at this way. And Passion 300. Passion 300 is a process very important for us because we create this process here. How? We take honey coffee with the wet mucilage, we put this honey coffee on green bags of plastic, we remove the air, and we fermentate the coffee for 300 hours. And at this way we can create later rosé wine notes in a coffee cup. If you like the wine, probably you will like this. And pea berry. Do you remember what is this? Pea berry.
It's small.
When we have only one seed inside one cherry. Remember, in the most of the cases, in more than 90% of the cases, we will have two. But when we have one, if you compare with a normal seed, you can notice that a normal seed is flat and a pea berry almond is round. And this is smaller than this one. And how can we separate pea berry from normal coffee? In the moment when we separate the cisco from the almond. This shell is the cisco. This is the thing that we use as a fuel for the silo, for the machine, for the oven. And inside we have the almonds. And the almonds are the most important part. With this we can roast the coffee. This is the part that we need to roast the coffee. Here we have all the flavor, all the smell, but we need to roast this to activate these properties. Yeah? Have you understood? Mostly. Yeah. Yeah, this is the thing that we have inside, but when we remove the cisco and we have the almond, and we need to do this with all the processes that we have, even with this, even with this. But we don't lose properties. We don't lose the sugar, the sweetie things here, because the almond has incorporated everything when we dry the coffee. And here we need to remove the shell and we need to remove the cisco in order to have the almond to roast the coffee. We put on the roasting machine almonds. And pasilla. Pasilla is the name that we have for the second class coffee. How can we identify this on a supermarket? Easy. First, for the price. If you have that a pound of coffee of 500 grams of coffee, of roasted coffee, is cheaper than 10,000 pesos, you have this with sure. We cannot sell the coffee so cheap, because if we sell the coffee at this way, we can lose a lot of money because we have a lot of processes. For this reason, this coffee is cheaper. They don't have these processes. And if you open the package when you buy second class coffee, you can notice that the coffee is almost black. For this coffee we need to use high levels of roasting in order to hide the problems. But when we use high levels of roasting, we can have more bitterness, and the bitterness for us is not good. And if you smell this coffee, you can notice that this coffee smells like wet sand or smoke. Smoke. Smoke, excuse me. Yeah. And yes, these are our processes. And how can we separate the cisco from the almond? How can we identify pea berry? And later, the coffee falls down here. And we have here tiny spaces, like the spaces between my fingers. We make pressure against this coffee, and later by friction, we will have only the cisco. It's impossible to have under the almonds. They are bigger, and we can have under only the mucilage. And the almonds fall down here, in these beds.
Это кожура.
And if you notice, we have holes. These holes are bigger than these ones, these are bigger than these ones, and these are bigger than these ones. Later, the vibration of the beds can separate the almonds for sizes. We will have here the biggest ones, and we will have here the smallest ones. The smallest ones are the pea-berry almonds. Remember, pea-berry represents only 5% of the cases, and with these almonds we can produce more intense coffee. But here in this last bit, we can have normal coffee too. For this reason, we need to remove these almonds, and later with our hands we will select pea-berry from normal coffee. And we need to select the rest of the coffee for sizes, because if we use different sizes when we roast coffee, probably we can have different levels of roasting at the same time. In order to have the same level, we use this at first, later this, and later this. And before we put the coffee here,
Layers like.
yeah. And before we put the coffee here with the Cisco, we have selected with our hands imperfections or tier filter of quality in order to remove problems. And later, when we have the almonds, we will select the almonds again with our hands to remove more imperfections for filter. And the last filter, remember, is after we roast the coffee, the fifth filter when we remove the last problems. Yeah? And this is our process. I don't know if you have a last question. Because this is Cisco from Pergamino, and this is Cisco from honey. The coffee that we don't wash, the coffee that we wash.
Yes. And
Мытое, то не мытое.
подожди, а как все помешали?
А,
Откуда они?
Это просто так.
Они просто оттуда потом снимают,
Оттуда они
да?
туда и туда,
То есть оттуда,
и
потом
там
уже-
они трясутся. Самые крупные остаются наверху, помельче остаются там.
так
И самые мелкие падают вниз.
есть они вот
Да, мелкие, которые одиночные зернышки.
Мелкие?
Да, мелкие.
What is milky?
Smallest one.
Smallest ones. This machine, we can use this to separate the Cisco from the almonds. If you notice, we have here only the almonds without Cisco.
And how you separate the Cisco from the almonds after this?
Like this,
The same machine.
the same. But less time,
Я так поняла, что это
easier.
первый инструмент.
But 100 years ago,
100 years ago, we used this. Yeah, but the history of a coffee here is not so long, only 200 years. Yeah.
Рыбочка прямо как это под мясо, да? Точно. Смотри.
Preparation. And the first thing that we need to know is the level of roasting. We can have 3 different levels: high, medium, and light. During this part we use only medium, because if we use high, we can destroy some properties. We cannot identify the fruity things, the sweety things, the wine notes. It's very difficult. And if we use this, we can have more bitterness. And the bitterness for us is not good. For this reason, we use only medium. With medium level of roasting, we can activate the properties, but we don't have bitterness. And light level is for the tasters. The coffee tasters can identify easier with this level differences in each coffee cup. But this is not commercial, because the flavor of this will be more similar to the tea flavor than the coffee flavor. Grinding, we have 3 different levels: coarse, medium, and fine. When we have coarse, we have less concentration of particles, but the particles will be bigger. And when we have fine, we will have more concentration of the particles, but the particles will be smaller, milky. And we need to use different levels of grinding for the different methods that we have. For example, we have here the French press, the Italian mocha, the B60, the Chemex, espresso machine, AirPress, and Japanese siphon.
Chemex is what? The Chemex?
Yeah.
It's like a Turkish.
No, it's very different.
It's Chemex. Yeah, we know
It's
that.
a filter method with paper. Turkish is another method, but we don't have this method here. But these are the most common methods in the world. For example, if we have this, when we use this, we need to use coarse. But if we use this or this, we need to use a level between medium and fine. But if we use an espresso machine or an AirPress, we need to use fine. But when we use a filter like this, or like the traditional way, here in Colombia, the soft method, a cotton filter, we need to use medium. Why? If we put coarse here, the water passes faster, and we cannot extract enough coffee. But if we put fine, the water passes slower, and we can change the values of the temperature. And if we change this probably we can destroy the coffee and we can have more bitterness. In order to have good coffee, with this method we need to use medium. Each method can give us different things, and each method needs special values for the grinding. And I need that you help me to grind our coffee. The coffee that we will drink is the first one, Salento coffee. It's a blend between red tabby cherries and Castillo cherries. 50% and 50% we roast together, and this coffee was washed. And 1, 2, 3.
It's not too dark.
No, it's medium, remember. Go ahead.
Давай, Лена, работай.
Yeah, perfect.
Ого! It's so difficult, this.
Давай я покручу.
Давай, иди покрути.
I use 1 spoon for each cup. 8 grams for 100 milliliters. This is a ratio. But if you want to feel a stronger coffee, you need to use more coffee for the same quantity of water, because with this ratio you can obtain always a really smooth coffee. And for example, we can have boiled water, and when the water is boiled, we will lose a lot of oxygen, and the oxygen is very important to extract all the properties of a coffee. For this reason, only 90 Celsius degrees or even less. And if you notice, I have here an empty jar. This empty jar will be under, and if we have a cold jar, we can have a difference on the temperature that we use for the water. And if we have this difference, we can produce a thermal shock. And if we produce that, we can destroy the coffee and we can have more bitterness. For this reason, we need to preheat the jar always. We need to wait a moment for the water. Meanwhile, if you have social networks,
Bowling? No?
yeah, no.
Not bowling.
When I see the first bubble, I will remove the water from here. And meanwhile, if you have social networks, you can follow us like Finca Locaso Salento, Facebook, Instagram, TripAdvisor. And if you have positive comments, my name is Andres. But if you have bad comments, please forget my name, forget my face, forget this place, forget this farm, forget everything about me. Water in the middle, and later I will make circles in order to have the same concentration of water and the same concentration of coffee. I use only a part of water because we need to remove the gases that we can keep for the roasting process. We'll remove this, and later we can put the rest of the water. Daniel, ¿cómo está? No lo había reconocido. Bien, muy bien. Hola Hilary, ¿cómo estás?
Bien, ¿y tú?
Bien, muy bien. No los había reconocido. Bueno. Buenas.
Ну вот это вот кофейная плантация. Мы получили удовольствие. Тут у них, кстати, гостиница на 4 номера. Так что можно пить кофе, смотреть на горы, наслаждаться хорошим горным воздухом. Ох, как ветерок обдувает. И журчит ручеек. Все классно. Лена, покажи, какой у тебя кофе. О, молодец. Будем пить хороший кофе. Колумбия. Ну и вот спускаемся мы, как в фильме «Романс о камне». Хорошо, что нет дождя. По таким джангл к машине. Потому что мы запарковались, подъехали не с той стороны. Мы за речкой, оказывается, запарковались. Да. Ну и чтобы не объезжать, решили подняться по вот этой индейской тропе. О май гад. Да. Но дождь чуть-чуть было не пошел. Но не пошел, слава богу. Иначе бы тут было бы шмяк, шмяк, шмяк. Улыбочка.
Ой, иди сюда, иди сюда.
Вау. Ты главное не упади в джангл.
Если я упаду, то буду как Роман Соколов.
Вот прямо в речку в ту и упадешь. Пошли. А. О май гад.
Смотри, как его держат такие тросы.
Да. Я говорю, как в хорошем голливудском фильме мы с тобой пробираемся. Только это не съемки декораций, а реальный мост, который держится какими-то ржавыми тросами. Ну попрыгай, попрыгай, да. Да, вот из этого джангла мы только что выбрались, между прочим. Ну, а теперь я расскажу вам про кофе. Еще в 1732 году, когда впервые эта культура была завезена на север Колумбии миссионерами-иезуитами, кофе не был оценен местными жителями. Как гласит предание, после такого фиаско монахи объявили, что каждый кающийся прихожанин во искупление своих грехов должен посадить кофейное деревце. И таким образом появились первые кофейные плантации. Международный кофейный бум стал истинным экономическим чудом для страны, особенно для областей, специализирующихся на кофе. Знаменитый кофейный треугольник – это Армения, Манизалес, Перейра. Он известен в мире своей уникальной мягкостью. Сегодня Колумбия входит в топ-3 лидеров мировых производителей кофе, большая часть которых выращивается в окрестностях города Армении, где мы находимся. Здесь выращиваются два основных типа кофе – робуста и арабика. Робуста с высоким содержанием кофеина, но с низким вкусом, тогда как у арабика вкус выше, но меньше кофеина. И в результате различных лабораторных смешаний из них существует более 100 сортов, которые делятся на традиционные, семейные и современные. Традиционные кофейные растения могут достигать 10 метров в высоту. Их сажают на расстоянии 2 метров друг от друга, чтобы их можно было собирать, а верхушки срезают. Они предпочитают тень, поэтому обычно рядом сажают как более высокие бананы, чтобы обеспечить тень. Современные кофейные растения не нуждаются в тени. Они не вырастают такими высокими и более устойчивы к вредителям. И они производят больше кофе из крупных зерен, что в свою очередь обеспечивает больший доход от урожая. Мирового стандарта кофе не существует, поэтому качество кофе является субъективным. Существует стандарт калибровки зерен. Кофе растет круглый год, и его обычно собирают, когда он готов, в сезон дождей, где 85% собирают в октябре или ноябре, а 10% в мае. Цвета плодов меняются с красного на желтый, затем на оранжевый, и, наконец, на темно-бордовый, указывая на то, что они готовы. В процессе выращивания много шагов. Сначала промытые и высушенные кофейные зерна помещают в речной песок для посева, на что требуется около 2 месяцев, чтобы начался рост. Затем эти проростки пересаживают с компостом в небольшой черный мешок по отдельности и высаживают в землю. Обычно требуется около 3 лет, чтобы растение зацвело, и еще 9 месяцев, чтобы быть готовым к сбору урожая. В общем, в общей сложности получается где-то 4 года и 2 месяца, прежде чем оно будет готово к сбору. Машина используется для отделения кожицы от зерен, и затем их замачивают в воде, чтобы удалить сладкий привкус кофейных зерен.
Они проходят несколько замачиваний, прежде чем это будет завершено. Если зерно плавает, его выбрасывают. Только тонущие бобы используются далее. Если в посеве всплывает более 20%, нужно приступить к расследованию проблемы с урожаем. И, наконец, их выкладывают на бетон, чтобы высушить на солнце. Последние этапы процесса – это удаление шелухи, измельчение зерен и их обжаривание на большой металлической сковороде на плите. По мере того, как бобы становятся темнее, запах становится все сильнее. И, конечно, лучший в мире кофе 100% это колумбийский.